Hello, this is Roy Youngblood. My topic for the social research project was the autism epidemic into adulthood, living in society when public education ends. And this was something that really hits home to me with autism in the family and different things that we recognize or I recognize as I look at the topic. And so I was really looking forward to this to see exactly what was happening as these children move into adulthood. We know statistically that autistic children, the epidemic is getting larger in this country. Uh, the diagnosis is becoming more and more prevalent. Right now, the latest trends with autism tell us that about 1 in 59 8-year-olds had autism in 2014. That's the latest data that we had. And that had actually went up from 1 in 68 in 2012. So there's been an ongoing uh, increase in this area, and the cases have climbed 150% since the year 2000. At that time, it was 1 in 150 children. And what we're finding is that during that time, or what was found, is that now these children are becoming adults. They're moving into society, they're moving out of the public school system, and there's things that they're facing as they're moving into those areas that's causing them uh, some problems and some grief. And there was a lot more research that could have been done here, but to focus in on the areas that were the most prevalent for those children and the things that they were dealing with. It really focused in on three areas that I was looking at as I began to study this. The first part of it was the living arrangements. What is happening with these children as they're becoming adults and they're moving into adulthood? Where are they living? How are they living? What are the things that they're having to deal with, the stresses on the family and them individually as they're moving into adulthood? How are they handling those things? The second part of this addressed the issue of employment. Where are they working? Are they going to school? Are they going to post-secondary education? What type of jobs are they qualifying for? How are they working out with the struggles that they face? How are those things becoming part of their lives? How are they doing with those things? The third thing that I addressed was healthcare. Obviously, someone that has the disability of autism is going to have some healthcare issues that are going to last their entire lifetime. So how are they addressing those issues? What are they able to do in those areas, and how is that working out for them? How are those decisions being made? Understand that autism is a neurological disorder in the brain. It is not something that you can see by looking at it like other disabilities, and it impairs cognitive function. It has some societal regulation and deals with relationship difficulties and things of that nature. Having trouble understanding certain things or understanding what people are saying, or a lot of the cognitive issues and those things, and being able from a social aspect to understand what's happening around them. And so they have some strengths and weaknesses. All of the children with autism have varying degrees, things that they can do well, things they can't do well. It varies from person to person. So as they move into adulthood, whatever strengths or weaknesses that they have move with them into those areas, and they need strength in those areas. The first issue, of course, to look at is living arrangements. The needs of the individuals is going to be varied. There's going to be different things that they're looking at. What I found as I began to do research and look at this issue is that 79% of the adults with autism are living with a parent or a guardian. It's just the way that it works out. 25% of all of them feel isolated. They feel isolated from other people or those in the community. And it places a burden not only on them, but also the family members as well in dealing with that. Outside of the home living arrangements, there's just not a whole lot of things out there that are available as far as group homes or assisted living within a community, that type of thing. There's just not a lot of housing options out there, and there's not very much at all specialty type of housing to meet the needs of autistic adults, because most communities are just not set up to deal with that type of care. And so they struggle with those things. Even though 79% live at home with their parents, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't like to be somewhere else. In fact, what I found is that nearly 60% of those that had the disability would prefer to live outside of their own home or with a roommate or some other type of living semi assistant living arrangement. As they begin to look at this, the parents are mindful of that. Those that are able and have the means will build an addition onto a home with a almost a self-contained apartment type of living, where it has a small kitchen, restroom facility, living room, just something where they can function semi-independent, but also if they have need, they're able to reach out to the family that's there if they have something they need assistance with. Also, small additional home on property, some type of a granny flat. In some areas, those were options as well. So there's some things that they can do even within those contexts of having to live at home that allows them to be able to do something different and allows them some sort of independence in those areas for those that are able to do that. Now, there is some independent and assisted living. If you can get into that, if you can get on the list for that, right now, even in the United States, there are 80,000 adults with autism that are waiting on publicly funded healthcare services. The wait can last up to 15 years. So this is not something that's going to happen quickly. If you move or you change locations, you've always got to keep up with the list. If you're moving into a new area, you have to start over. So there's a whole bunch of issues involved with the diagnosis of autism. You've got supported employment, transportation, supported employment, healthcare if they're living outside of the home or depending on someone else. All of those things, interdependent relationships. And so it isn't just something that's as easy as moving out or, taking on something new. There's more complexities to the disorder than that. And of course, it's difficult. It's difficult because change is not something that is easy for an autistic child or an autistic adult. We all like routines. Autism finds great security and understanding and knowing what to expect and going through those routines and being able to know what is going to happen. And so anytime you have change, it brings stress into the individual's life, those with autism. And there's some obstacles in that are going to be difficult for them to deal with. And so when looking at the issue of living arrangements, far and large, the majority of autistic adults are going to live either with parents or with a caregiver, perhaps a sibling, but someone close to them that can consistently be with them and help provide their needs, take care of the things that they have, sort of a looking over the shoulder to make sure that everything is the way that it is supposed to be and that they can lead in those areas. And so it is one of the stresses that the parents or guardian, most of the time parents of a child with autism, are going to face, is that they're not most likely going to have the empty nest syndrome, because that's not going to be part of the reality of where they are moving forward. It is going to be more of a guardian type role that is always there to know that the individual that has autism, that the parents or the guardian have their back, and that they're there for their best interest and looking over and making sure everything is taken care of, and really helping them in the areas that they're weak deal with the things that need to be handled, whether it be medical or employment or financial, being able to back up those areas and help them deal with the complexities of life that honestly are expected from all adults. But adults with a disability are going to have more challenges in those areas. Now, the second issue that was addressed was the issue of employment. This is obviously a major concern. Now that I'm out of the school system, I don't have the free, appropriate public education. I don't have the acts that have been passed. I don't have the support of the school system anymore, the public education school system, to help me with these things. What do I do with my time every day? How am I going to fulfill those things? And so obviously there are obstacles here as well, depending on the level of care that the autistic child needs. And so navigating the systems of employment, learning how to fill out an application, learning how to, go to an interview, how to answer those questions, businesses that are actually supportive of autistic adults or those with special needs. Not all are necessarily the same. And so there are barriers, and they can be challenging. The cognitive abilities and limitations there, the severity, any other diagnosis with autism that go along with the disorder, things like OCD or, different psychological things that are faced with it. Those are going to be difficulties. Speech can also be a problem that they face. And so, it really depends on the individual, and they're all so varied in those areas. But the challenges that they have, how do I follow up on a job interview? How do I get in touch with the local government agencies that can help me get employment since I have a disability? All of those things have to be worked through. There's obviously job coaching as well. Consistent work history is a very difficult thing to find. The barriers are going to be there. You're going to need help with social workers. You're going to need help with those things to help in the process of gaining employment. And so successful unemployment is a challenge. It's like housing. It's like every other issue that the autistic adult faces. There's going to be challenges in those areas. Okay. Now, what they found, or what I found as I began to do research, is that, there were two factors that made for successful employment for those with autism. The first part was education, and the second part was family support. Participants that were older, had a higher household income, had higher functional skills, they did better. Had higher levels of education, perhaps graduated high school, maybe even some college in there. They had greater chances of success in those areas. It didn't necessarily mean that they were free from being underemployed, which is working less than full time. And in fact, a lot of autistic adults don't prefer to work full time because the government assistance that they get with their disability with regard to insurance benefits is often better than what the employer could provide. So they walk a fine line there, not so much with the revenue from disability income, which is very negligible, not much at all, as to dealing with the income they would receive from employment, but just strictly from the insurance benefits themselves. Employment, the issue with social struggles is going to be difficult for them with employment. It's going to be problems with that. We found that, even there was stress for those that didn't necessarily want to give their diagnosis because they didn't want to be excluded from employment. And then once they were employed, They didn't necessarily want it to be known if they were able to gain the job without having to release this information. If they didn't need a job coach, they didn't want the employer to know because they were afraid that they would be terminated from the job if something were to happen, or if they were to find out, if they were to disclose. The reality of the situation, the opposite is true. The employers that knew the disability, that were able to accommodate it along with the Americans with Disabilities Act, they did far better. They had much more positive outcome than those that didn't. The difference between full-time and part-time work is about a 50% split between each one. It's just limitations due to disability, social skill challenges, health limitations. Employment is difficult. It's just a challenge for them to deal with. But it helps with their self-esteem. It helps with the issue of pride. If they're able to do those things and accomplish those things, then it works out very well for them. The last issue is healthcare. Obviously, this is a big thing for all of us, but for someone with a permanent disability, this is going to be a major issue. The autistic adult obviously is going to have some needs from that. They're going to have specialized needs. There are in some additional health issues besides the autism that come up. If it's directly related to the autism or not, that's unknown. But, the difficulty in explaining my symptoms to a doctor, explaining where it hurts, what it feels like, sensory problems that they deal with, the processing of visual and hearing, and smells, all of those things are difficult for a person with the autism disorder. So all of those things are going to be taken into account to the healthcare system. And so the environmental stresses of healthcare, there's not a lot of needs addressing that in the hospital: sight, sounds, things that we take for granted for those that don't have the disability. And it can make it difficult for those that have the disability to deal with. Strong smells, strong sounds, those type of things, not understanding what's being said to them, not understanding what the doctor is trying to explain to them, and trying to have someone with them, usually a parent or a guardian, to help walk them through that process and, for lack of a better term, speak their language so that they're able to communicate with the autistic adult. Obviously, the cost is higher for those that have the autism spectrum disorder. This just goes with the disability. Their healthcare costs are going to be higher. There's going to be additional specialties that are going to be needed. You're going to have psychiatric care, you're going to have medicine needs, additional assistance managing, all of those things being able to be understood by the person providing healthcare. Those are all important. And what they found with healthcare, for those that are willing to look at the autism disorder and train themselves and understand it, there's a more positive outcome. Obviously, having a parent or primary caregiver with them as well helps with the process moving into that. Amazingly, one of the part of the research that surprised me is that the majority of those individuals, I think it was 60%, are still their own legal guardian. They sign their own paperwork, they're involved in their own decisions, they may have some assistance there, they may have someone that is a power of attorney, but yet they're still in charge of their own healthcare decisions. They're still ones that can legally sign for themselves. And so these are all positives, to understand, but also the help that's needed in those areas. Now, in the conclusion of this, addressing the three areas, addressing, what happens when the public education system ends, living arrangements, employment, healthcare. Those are the three big things that autistic adults face. Now, what can the church do about these things? How can the church help address these areas? And I think the first part of it is just making the church aware. I think the first place in this would just be getting someone from a community, whether it's, from the public school system, and, the senior high, those that see them graduating out, or maybe a job assistance coach or a doctor in the area that sees autistic adults, to be able to come in and educate the church and say, look, you've got a percentage of your population around you that nobody's ministering to, nobody's touching these individuals. Nobody is there to help mentor them or to give their parents assistance or their guardian assistance. It's just being aware, making them aware of the need. Certainly, not every church can meet every need in the community, but what we can as leaders in the church and as individuals is to put the information out there and then allow the Holy Spirit to take it from there. And if the Holy Spirit speaks to someone's heart and says, I want you to start to move into this area, that's how ministry begins. Ministry begins when we make people aware of the need that's out there. I think the second part of what the church can do, other than putting the information out there, is allowing the church itself to be a resource. So my second part would be the church needs to make its facilities available to the community if there are organizations out there that are working with autistic children and adults, but specifically with adults, to begin to develop the type of ministry where there's connections made there. There's great power in connections. A lot of these adults feel isolated. If you are able to bring them together and just let them spend time together at the facilities or whatever it is, and allow them the privilege of getting to know one another, making those connections with phone numbers, emails, those type of things, letting the parents come together where they can learn from each other, just setting the tone and making the facilities available. There's not a great cost to this, but boy, it would be a great opportunity for them. And of course, the third thing is to be financially supportive. I think every church can look in this area, in the area that they're in. Are there some organizations that we can financially support? Is there something that we can do? Can we do transportation? Is there some way we can get financially involved? Can we use a church van and take, a group of autistic kids to a football game, a baseball game, a bowling night out? Just anything that doesn't take a lot of effort but has some financial support in it. Love is an action. And so anything that a church can do to move into those areas would be greatly appreciated by those that are dealing with an epidemic of autism. This is in every community in the United States. It's everywhere right now, and largely unchurched. I spoke to a minister of education years ago regarding the issue of autism, and I asked him, why doesn't the church do more? And his response to me was, we don't know what to do, and we're afraid we're going to do it wrong. And so if a church is willing to get involved, begin to educate themselves, begin to make those resources available that the church has, and also financially support all of those things, would be great positives in moving forward with this disorder. It's a wonderful topic to look at, largely unchurched, opened my eyes to a lot of things that I did not know in advance. And so it was a blessing to be able to see that, and hopefully can take it the next step forward from here and actually begin to take action to move into minister. I think there's a lot of family members out there that would love to be associated with the church, that knew that there was some love and support. Jesus said we're supposed to remember the widows and the orphans. This is a great need, not necessarily of a widow or an orphan, but a group of people that need supported and need to know the love of the church and the love of our Savior. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this, and I hope that you find some encouragement and maybe some wisdom out of this as you begin to look at with your own church what the Lord would have you do with this issue.